Oh, it's loud today. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to call this meeting to order and welcome everyone to the Coeur d'Alene School District's 271's meal price and facility rental fee increase hearings and board workshop of May 20th, 2024. Would everyone please rise and together we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Terrific. I'd like to introduce our participants for this afternoon. Starting at my far right is Miss Marian Southwick, Clerk of the Board, Dr. Sean Hucker, Superintendent. To my left is Miss Leslie Bierke, Vice Chair, Miss Heather Tenbrink, Board Member, Miss Allie Anderton, Board Member, Mr. Jimmy McAndrew, Board Member, and I'm Rebecca Smith, Board Chair. Public comment as part of the fee increase hearings will be heard at the beginning of this meeting. There's 2 different times for public comment. Other comments for the board may be submitted via email at trustees@cdaschools.org or in writing through the clerk. Thanks. Is there a motion to approve today's agenda?
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, today's agenda is approved then. The first part of our meeting today is our fee increase, meal increase presentation. Mr. Voller, thanks.
All right, good afternoon, trustees. Thank you for this time. So hopefully this will be probably the easier part of some of the things we're going to talk about today. But with the meal price increase hearing, basically by statute, we're allowed to increase fees up to 5% without doing a hearing. We're recommending about an average of a 10% increase. And you can see in your board packet, there was a table that showed what the fees were to what the fees are now. The parentheses is the average increase of what we were going to from last year. The reason for the increase are increased food costs, the labor prices that we pay, and we just need to feel like that's probably where we need to be this year. And so this is the recommendation for the meal prices that we would have for the next fiscal year. You can see the weighted average is 3.80. The recommended average that's put out by the USDA is 3.85, so we are pretty close to that. And we feel like this is what we would recommend for the increases. And I think I put a little bit more information in the board memo that I wrote, but are there any specific questions relating to this one that I can answer for you?
Are we concerned with the increase in prices that our sales are going to go?
We've seen sales go down as well, regardless of pricing. But we have to find a sustainable model with the increases of, just the cost of goods coming into us too. And so, that's a lot of what's driving the increase in this. And so, we came out of the 2 years of free meals, and since we've been back to paid, we've seen meal sales go down quite a bit. So,
Thanks.
yeah.
And I just want to review, this is for it's not our general fund, it's its own specific fund, which is called, what?
The
Fund 230.
Fund 230, yeah. Okay.
So all of our meal ins and outs are all out of that Fund 230,
I think you're
right?
talking about facility use, right? Fund. Okay, 290 is child
290,
nutrition, right?
that's
So
it.
yeah,
Child nutrition,
it is
okay.
not a general fund expense, except, however, general fund will have to cover any deficit that
Right.
that program has. And currently, that program
We
is
took-
running at a deficit. There's a little bit of fund balance that should cover about one more year, but that's part of the reason that we have to start to try to right size and match the meals to that. And we'll continue to take a long look at what we're selling for meals. We're also looking at labor hours and some different things as well to see what we can do with that department.
Okay, thank you.
And what's this year's deficit-ish?
Do you know that answer, Shannon?
With or without the general fund contribution?
Without. Just wondering if we have an idea what it'll do to the gap. I'm in support of it. I'd just like to have that reconciled in my head.
Without the general fund contribution of 300,000 this year, the deficit will be $850,000.
And then what does this do for us with regards to that ongoing, approximately?
You had that table as well that you'd worked up.
And I know that there are very rare districts that break even on this. Is that, they hardly exist.
You are correct. This is a problem that's going on at districts all across the country right now.
So with the increase, along with declining enrollment, we'd maybe see about 116,000
Okay.
additional dollars.
Okay. Gosh, that's huge, huge makeup, so.
Jeff, as you've looked at other districts, is there any models out there of any districts that are doing solutions to that we should pay attention to, or?
I mean, yeah, I think it's time to look at some different models and, one of the things we are doing is we're taking a hard look at meal per labor hours, and we're probably overstaffed in some of our kitchens. I can give you an example right now that, CHS sells fewer meals than Skyway Elementary, and we have more employees working at CHS. So we need to do some leveling of the amount of staff that we have working in that to help manage some of our staffing hours for that.
All right, is there any
other
additional
questions?
or any? All right. Well, then, this concludes the presentation portion of the meal price fee increase hearing. We now move into public comment. Members of the public wishing to address the board regarding the fee increase are limited to one comment, not to exceed 3 minutes. And at the designated time, you'll be called to the podium. Please state your name and your city of residence. Is there any public comment on meal prices? All right. Yes, sir.
I just made a generic.
Yeah. Would you? Great.
If I may say a couple words.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so if we just separate the two comments into things, that'd be great.
Just quick, simple stuff.
Yeah, that'd be great. Come on up. Thanks.
So, just looking at the prices, everybody knows how much everything costs these days. Okay, so personally, I think you're not charging enough. That's my opinion. I don't know what the numbers are for the adults who purchase breakfast and lunches, but I think that's one place to start right off the bat is, I think the breakfast for an adult ought to be just $5. I mean, that's cheap. That's really cheap. And for lunch, your guess is as good as mine. But I think for lunch, I'd say probably 6.5, maybe push 7, whatever. Okay, because they're adults. They know what food costs. Okay, so. Without getting into the weeds, I'll let you guys all do that. But I'm just saying, I think you're on the low scale here, especially given the fact that it sounds like you're having to dredge up a lot of money out of the general funds every year for the food. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. This concludes the meal price fee increase public comment portion. We'll move into discussion then and action from there. All right. Trustees, any comments, thoughts?
Well, just to Troy's point, how did we come up with the adult cost? The adult pricing, I mean, I don't know if you've had any school lunches, but, you know, I don't know what you get for an adult meal.
It's pretty similar to what like a high school lunch would be. And I think the one comment that I would make with that is actually many of the lunches are purchased by our schools for the adults in just kind of as appreciation for when they go do a lunch duty, a recess or something. It's sort of a makeup. So it's actually some of our funds that are coming to, you know, provide them a lunch when they were out doing a duty during a time or covering, you know, lunch help with that. And so there's not a ton of teachers that buy a lunch. You know, most of them bring their own or do their own thing for that. And so the actual sales of lunches is a really, really low amount that we do for the adults. And we're raising that price 25 cents, going from $5 to $5.25 for the lunch.
And trustees, I apologize. I guess we actually make action after the facility rental fee increase hearing, so
Okay.
I just wasn't.
Yeah, I thought it
just
was
ready
kind
to
of,
like.
I thought it was on the low side as well, and then last time trustee Bierke put me in line and told me that it wasn't out of
I
land.
would
but-
say for the adults, however, you all know how I feel about school lunches. So, you know, I'll just say that.
Yeah.
And, you know, $5 for an adult lunch, that's
Yeah.
maybe not as good as you could go someplace else. I'll just say that. So, I don't know. I can see your point, but I appreciate that you're trying to do something nice for there too. So,
I mean, just philosophically, we're bumping them up
I was talking
11
about
cents.
the kids.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I
But I
was talking
mean,
about the
bumping
kid
those ones
prices.
up 11%. I definitely want to get to the point where this breaks even, and I think next year, we bump it up a quarter now, the pain won't be as hard next year when we can get to the point of curing that 116. It might be another nickel, but I like how you put it together.
All right. Well then, trustees, this officially concludes the meal price fee increase hearing. Thank you to those who have participated. We'll now move on to the facility rental fee increase hearing. And our presentation again from Mr. Voller, and there is lots of information here.
Yeah, there is a boatload of information in your packet, and I'm sorry to overwhelm you with that. But as you can see, this is a pretty detailed and complex facility rental program that we have. And so, you know, when you look back on it historically, we haven't changed our fees since 2014. And that's creating a problem for us right now as we look at where we're going with these fees right now. And I gave you a lot of research in there just so you can look at the context of what we've done with where we came up and how we established some of those fees. So there was a full, you know, research spreadsheet of, you know, comparative fees. And if you look at, you know, other school districts and municipalities, it really is all over the place. I mean, there's some that don't charge any. There's some that charge a lot more than we do. You know, we are trying to find kind of that medium balance of, you know we need to adjust. When you look at our indoor rental fees, they were reasonably in line. I think we're recommending a slight increase for that. And then when you look at our outdoor rentals, that's where I think we really, really have a problem. You know, we were charging $3.75 for a 4-hour block. That's, you know, basically almost 94 cents an hour. So just under $1 an hour to rent our fields. And I'll show you in a spreadsheet how that breaks down a little bit here in a few minutes with this presentation. You know, some would say we're a taxing entity, that, you know, we get our fees from the taxpayers, which we do. There's no doubt about that. And so some would argue that, you know, our rentals should be free for use. But we know we have costs associated with those after hours from, you know, opening the gyms, having staff in there. You know, we always want to have it when we have staff available to do that. We are looking at some models where we can increase that indoor revenue by, I think I said this last week in preparation for this, but where we have a gym, we have a student custodian position and kind of expand that into a monitor position, which we have had. And I think, now there's a little bit more of an appetite for that. We have a couple student custodians that are on staff right now that we could expand and, have them come in on a Saturday and be a monitor, and there would be a rate for that. And so part of what you see in this is this whole spreadsheet that we can go through, and it would say, okay, what's the school? What's the gym? What day do you want it? What are your needs? And we would build that spreadsheet and that quote, and then the renter can say, yes, I want to do that, or no, I don't. And, that might include a fee for a monitor to be available on a Saturday. And I've talked to a few basketball programs that have said, well, gym time is really, really hard to come by, and we might be willing to do that, to have a monitor come in, a paid monitor, and participate in that. And so, we could see some increased revenue from that. And this is a hard one to predict. I don't know where this will go. If the fees go up, I don't know if people will use less, or where this will go. We'll have to see over time how this plays out. But I do know specifically with the outdoor fees that we are, grossly low when you look at that compared to what many other school districts are doing. And, you'll see that on that spreadsheet with the model page there. So ultimately, what you guys are going to be looking at is approving 9605 Exhibit 1 and Exhibit 2. And so there was a previous exhibit that's in your board packet that was what we used to use for our rates. And I'll open one of these up here. Uh-oh. Is that making me sign in, Seth? Is that what it's doing? Let me. Oh, here. Give me 1 second.
Verification.
Okay, here we go. Looks like we're back up. So here's an example of the spreadsheet. And so when the renter comes in, I know this is really hard to read on that screen there, but just to kind of talk you through the way this works is as we're looking at this, so this is for the indoor rental. And, so somebody would request it and say, okay, I want to rent an elementary school gym, a middle school gym, or a high school gym. So what we're proposing here is a tiered schedule. And so, when you think about our schools and kind of how the size of the gyms, the quality of the gyms, the middle school gyms are better than the elementary school gyms. They're a little bit bigger. They've got more bleacher seating. The high school gyms are even larger as well. And kind of in the concept of what we're bringing you with this whole package of what you're going to be approving, ultimately what you're approving are these two exhibits because that's the one that has the fees clearly defined on them. The policy 9605P has some updates to it as well. The board does not have to approve policy, but I wanted you to be aware because there were a lot of red line procedures. You're right. Thank you for that correction. So on the P, the board does not have to approve the procedure. And there are a lot of red lines in that we wanted you to be aware of. But to align with the scope of what we're doing with this whole proposal, we had to make sure that basically the narratives in there were in line. And then I also put together a whole facility guide. And that facility guide was included in your board packet. That's it could end up being a 20-page document or something with all the different exhibits of that. And so, but ultimately going back to what this proposal is going to be is, so we have different category groups that we are going to have. And so here you can see on this one, you've got category C, category D, and category E. Those would be the paid groups. The category A are the contracts. So those are basically Hayden Parks and Rec and Coeur d'Alene Parks and Rec. And so we're under contract with them. And so they just pay what the contract says they're going to pay. And then if you look at that guide, it clearly says which ones are the park and rec schools. And so they have the right to use those park and rec schools because they're contractually obligated to use those schools. And so you can look in that guide and it says, okay, these schools are not available for gym rental because the park and rec school is using them. So they use one of the gyms at Woodland. They use the Dalton gym. They use several of the gyms. And so that's part of the reason some of our indoor fees, our indoor use is so low, is because Parks and Rec uses them quite a bit. And they do have their own trained monitors. And so like the Atlas gym on a Saturday is during the winter is full of little kids basketball teams because they just, from, I don't know, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. they've got little kids basketball running in there, and and that's a great program for them. But they really book up that gym, and then they've got practices throughout the week and things for those programs and things like that. So they use a lot of those. So Category A is not included in this rental sheet because they're included under the contracts. Category B is also a little bit more clearly defined in that procedure, but those would be school-related and government agency groups or free national youth groups. So that would be PTAs, PTOs, booster clubs, those types of organizations, tutoring clubs that come into our school to help tutor kids because we feel like that helps promote their learning. And then the national youth groups are mainly the Scouts, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. And then Category C is nonprofit youth. And so, we certainly want to support the youth of our community. That's who we are. That's what we do. But we know that these are outside user groups that have their own sports clubs or music programs or, different kinds of programs. But they are nonprofit, solely youth-focused programs. That would be Category C. So they would get the lower rate. Then Category D would be the rest of the nonprofits that serve either a mix or adults only. And then Category D is a much larger jump. That would be for-profits. We don't have a ton of users in Category D. We have a few. And we have maybe 1 or 2 Category E users a year that come in. But they certainly do call, and we would want to give them a quote and the opportunity to use our facilities. And certainly you can see those rates are much higher for those Category E group users. And then the second part of that tier is going back then to the elementary, the middle, and the high school. So we would charge more for the middle school and then even more for the high school. You'll see in the narrative that I put together in the rental guide, there's a lot of description about high schools in there. High schools are busy. If you walk into the high school on any day, any afternoon, it is a busy place. There's a lot going on at the high schools. So we ultimately really discourage rentals of the high schools. In fact, it's really not part of the regular rental pool. But we also know in the high schools, we do have some really unique facilities that should be made available to the community. For example, the auditoriums. If somebody's coming in to do a symphony program, well, our auditoriums are a perfect place for that. And so, as long as we're not doing, have all of our sets on the stage for the theater production or something that we are doing, that could be made available. And so there's rates defined for those in there. So that would be one example. We also know that we have some, indoor facilities that people want to use in the winter, like the hitting facilities for baseball, the new facility that was built at CHS. And so both Lake City and CHS have some, and occasionally those are rented as well. So those would be a few examples of those that we probably could make available. Obviously, the turf field is available as part of that rental pool. And we know Lake City is hoping to gain funds and do a turf field here in the near future as well. And so we put a lot of detail into that. But like, for example, here, if you look at classrooms, let me pause on classrooms for a second. Classroom rentals, generally we discourage rentals from. It could be available if a teacher says, yeah, I would be okay with the group doing in there. But think about how classrooms are set up with, all of the teachers teaching stuff and personal items in there and teaching items and things. It's not a really great space for a rental. We would prefer to rent the commons area, the auditoriums, the gyms, those kinds of open spaces. They're more set up for a user group. And occasionally we might have a HOA that wants to come in and have a meeting at one of those locations. And so that would certainly be an example of what those might look like there. So again, now then going back to like the auditorium, if somebody wants an auditorium, do they need microphones, a lighting system? Do we need to have one of our trained technicians running those for them? What would be the rates and the fees for that? So you see an hourly rent rate, and then you see like a per day rate if they were going to rent like a microphone or a sound system, or need tech support to help set something up for one of the programs that would come into the auditorium. And then we get out into, in the rental guide, we spend a little bit more time defining, defining custodial fees. That's something we've been a little bit vague on. If somebody's going to just rent the gym for an afternoon of practices, there wouldn't be custodial fees. You know, our custodians could just clean those. We have them leave at 9 o'clock. That gives our custodian an hour to come in and clean those last bathrooms before they wrap up at 10 o'clock and finish their shift. But if there's a tournament going on, we have been really vague on tournament fees, so we're now going to just charge a tournament fee, and that really is kind of an impact fee on the overall use of the building. You know, there's going to be more toiletry supplies that are going to be used for a tournament when more people come in, and so that would be both indoor and outdoor, that we have these tournament fees in there that would be assessed. And then if we would talk to the custodian at each school and say, all right, here's the program that's coming into rent. Do you feel like we need to charge any custodial fees? And what would those be? We would quote those on this fee schedule and then send that to the renter to say, all right, do you accept these? And, you know, with your rental, and here's your approval for that. So this one, you can see this is definitely a little bit more detailed of a spreadsheet. Will take us a little bit more time to work out, but I think we'll be a little more clear and fair in having the renter approve the fees as we go through this. So this is an example of the indoor. And then if I go back to this one, here's the outdoor, and it's pretty similar. It is a little busier when you look at outdoor. Seth, do you want to make that a little bit bigger? You want to do that for me while I'm talking here? On the outdoor, a few things to point out. We've added some of the very specific things. Again, we've really created a designation of the high school fields. So, the high school baseball, softball fields are much nicer than you would see at the middle school, and then even the elementary school are more just kind of tied into an extension of the playground. So there are different rates for those. The turf field, we have rates. One of the things we realized is that there's sometimes a lot of shifting between different things that might be going on the turf field. So for example, if it's going to be soccer, we have to bring the goals out. We want to make sure that we set those goals up for the soccer program rather than having a bunch of kids drag those across and start tearing up the new turf that went down. And so, we would just charge a set fee of like $30 for a nonprofit youth program to just do the one-time setup of the goals to make sure that is ready for their program. We also, like at those outdoor fields between the baseball fields and the softball fields at the high schools, there are outside bathrooms. While those are not winterized during the winter, we could make those available. There should be a fee available for that. Those are set into this schedule. Track, we were charging $1 an hour for track rental. We know we have some needs on the tracks. And then we also had a bunch of user groups. There's one track and field sports club in the community, and they wanted to use our equipment as well. And so we put an equipment fee in there for that as well, because we feel like, to get out the hurdles and the high jump mats and things like that, there should be a fee assessed for that. So a little bit more of kind of a checklist of fees that you see in this new proposed schedule that we have here. And again, then custodial monitor rates that you see in there. So ultimately, that is what you guys are going to be approving as a board, are the rates proposed in this 9605 E1 and E2. And the reason it's E1 and E2 is it was so busy that we separated them into indoor and outdoors. I think you can see there. So then in your packet, you have the 9605P. That's the procedure that had quite a few red lines in it. Most of those were really just to align to kind of the new schedule in there. It created some clarification on supervision. The priorities for use are more clearly defined in that procedure. And then the facility rental guide that I mentioned earlier. This is just the cover page from the facility rental guide. And you'll see in that guide that it does a better job at clearly defining what is available for rent, which ones are the park and rec schools. There, you'll see the screenshots of Google Maps that clearly define what the fields are. So Canfield, for example, has soccer 1, soccer 2, a practice field, a baseball field, and a softball field, right? There's quite a bit that's available for rent at Canfield Middle School. And so it clearly defines which of those are. So are you renting soccer 1 or soccer 2, and a practice field. And so those are more clearly defined in this rental guide. Again, we spent quite a bit of time with some of the definitions, talking a lot about the high school use, what's available, what's not, if it is available, how would it be used in the high schools in that rental guide. The use of gyms, it talks a little bit about the lottery that we do. So just so you understand the lottery, we've been using that for indoor rentals because we have such limited space that, I'll show you on another slide here, but I want to say there were 48 users over the last 3 years that have used our indoor spaces. And most of those are basketball programs like AAU basketball. There's quite a few of those teams that want to come in. And so we hold a lottery. And so, you might unfortunately get Thursday night at 8 o'clock, for a practice time, but that's what's available. And so we just have more demand than we have space available. And so we hold a lottery to try to, allocate fair space off of that and not single out any user, to give priority to somebody because we don't want to manage that. I'll talk to you about that in just a second. I'm gonna actually pull that one up and just spend a quick second on that one. And then another thing before we go to that spreadsheet, Jimmy, that you're referencing is in-kind donations. So we do accept in-kind donations. And what that means is if somebody wants to make a donation to the school district and we feel like it is in alignment with, the amount that the rental would be, they can do that, or it could offset the amount that they would rent. So, for example, North Idaho Youth Symphony is a really good example of that. They will often say, hey, what are your needs for the music program at the high schools? And it might be buying music stands or buying whatever, an instrument that they need, that lives at the school. So they will say, okay, those cost, their rental is going to be $300, so they will donate $300 worth of goods that goes directly to the school. So that's what in-kind donation is. Or sometimes we'll have a baseball club come in and be like, hey, we're going to do a work party at the field and we're going to bring in dirt. Here's what it's going to cost for the dirt that we're going to bring in. And, that basically that will reduce or, in some cases, because our rates have been so low, they wouldn't pay anything because, maybe they owed us $740 for their whole year, their whole season of rentals, to bring in that amount of goods and dirt and, chalk and turf and all you need things for a baseball field is not that hard to cover in kind. But that will still be available, and that's defined a little bit more in that rental guide. So let me go to that spreadsheet now that maybe here. Okay. So Jimmy, to answer your question about not seeing any basketball programs. So when you look at the indoor hours, because the majority of them are basketball, it was a list of, about 50, about 30 of those were basketball teams that were in there. And it was, AAU Heat and AAU Eagles and AAU, whatever the team name was, right? For example, I just collapsed those so that you you just have a summary of 48 users for the indoor rentals on that very first line that make up the totals that you see in the indoor, because that was such a busy spreadsheet as well that I just hit all those columns and in there. But you can.
None of them would be, none of those users are eligible for the discount.
Right, because they're using, so like, let's see, the highest use of AAU basketball was 150 hours. Most of them were like 50 hours, 36 hours, 25 hours, 6 hours, 25 hours, 33 hours. So most of them are in about that 30 to 40 hour range that they've been using for their sports. And so, yeah, like I said, most of them are basketball. There's a couple volleyball programs in there. We've actually seen some of the volleyball phase out over the last couple of years. A few HOAs rent from us, a couple wrestling programs, a few rentals that were maybe a sports team that was going to hold an end of year banquet that they would rent the cafeteria. That's predominantly what you see. You've got North Idaho Youth Symphony, Panhandle Symphony Orchestra, and then a few kind of one-off events that, people would just rent a commons area for a meeting kind of thing. So that's primarily what you see out of those 48 overall users that are defined in that indoor category that that I have in there. And like I said, I just hid that. And then I think one thing that's really interesting in this, so parking lot rent, well, before I get there, parking lot rentals, occasionally people do rent the parking lots. We just left that at $1 an hour because mainly we just want to know that people are using the parking lot and have it booked. Most of that is going to be for maybe it's church overflow parking on a Sunday that we allow them to use that, which doesn't impact us at all. We just want to know that people are using it and we know what's going on with that activity. Occasionally there is a fundraiser that they use it and then they shuttle people to an offsite fundraiser. And so they're saying, hey, can we rent your parking lot for this? There's been a few, large gatherings at a church for maybe a big memorial service for somebody prominent in the community. And they say, can we rent and use your parking lot? And then the Blazing Divas and the Sparklers rent it. And if you ever see them doing their dance routines in the parking lot, they do rent it, and so, but we just want to know what's going on, what activity, and make sure that's booked in there. So that rental fee we're not proposing a change for the parking lot rental. We just really want to know what's going on there. You've got tennis programs. There's one main user for that. There's one tennis camp that's come in occasionally over the last couple of years. You can see their use has gone down a little bit this last year, but they were renting about 740 hours previously. You've got track, a couple track programs, softball. You've got several softball programs that rent fields. The baseball, several different baseball clubs that rent from us. And then under your general grass fields, so basically those are soccer, football, and lacrosse. You can see the different organizations that rent from us for that. Timber Soccer is a unique one. You'll see they are by far our biggest user. They use around 8,000, 6,000, 8,000, 7,000 hours a year they rent from us. What they have done is they basically try to buy out our fields. And when we get their facility use requests, it will be every elementary school and every middle school for as much as they can get. And we do limit that time so that we can have some other users come in. But because our fees have been so drastically low, they basically buy them out on a Saturday from 7 a.m. to like 9 p.m. And so they just buy it out. And so, they generally pay us around $12,000 a year. They're by far our biggest user. And I think what that program will have to do is probably manage their time a little bit better and actually book it when they use it and spend a little bit more time administratively looking at how they're going to manage that for their program. And so in the estimates that I did for that program, knowing that they use about 8,000 hours a year, I just kind of estimated and guessed they probably use 4,000 actual hours a year, which is still by far more than anybody else uses. You'll see up in here, you've got another soccer club that uses 1,000 hours. You've got junior tackle football that uses 650 hours. Little League uses 400 hours. Lumbermen's uses anywhere from 1,000 to a couple hundred hours, depending on what they're doing in their season. A softball program that uses around 700 or 800. One thing I think that's really interesting that I wanted to point out to you as you look at this spreadsheet is down here under these totals, indoor total hours, you have 884. This was last year, and we brought in $22,000 in revenue. 13,000 hours for outdoor use, and we brought in $22,000 in revenue. So, you can, where's my cursor here? Okay. So I'm looking right here. If you can see my cursor, 884 hours brought in around $22,000 in revenue. 13,000 in outdoor rentals brought in 22,000. So you can definitely see a discrepancy there. We don't have to have outdoor fields monitored. Our fields are open, and but we need to know who's using them. And there's been conflict on our fields of a team showing up like, I have it rented, and they're like, no, we're practicing, and they have to work it out. And we usually hear about it that those discrepancies do happen, and so it is important to have those booked out when teams are using them. And then you can see on the very last line, it shows the breakdown of the Park and Rec contracts. So Coeur d'Alene pays us $30,000 a year, and Hayden Park and Rec pays us around $14,000 for their use.
Jeff, off of the 400 hours, are some of those organizations, I know we noticed, that there's going to be increases. Have you personally chatted with with all these?
I've not chatted
Specifically
with
those
like directors
groups?
of those organizations, but I have chatted with families that participated in those in many of those organizations to see, hey, do you feel like these fees are out of line, and how would they impact you? And we know that probably clubs are going to have to increase some rates, and I've heard several of those clubs have already increased rates because I know the city has increased rates for them, and tournament fees are going up, and it's a sign of the times right now that things are just more expensive, and unfortunately that's the reality that we're living in right now, and we need to take a look at that, what it means for us as a school district as well. And then, so the blue column on the right are projections that I made based off of the hours from last year of what the group would pay if they were to rent the same amount of hours at the new rates. And again, some of those are estimates, like with the Timber Soccer, I use 4,000 as the base hours for them, and then put them at about 50% of a elementary school rental and 50% of a middle school rental rate to create the calculations for them of what they would do. So you could see they're probably the most impacted in jumping to about $50,000 in, what additional fees that they would owe us. But also we know that's a really big club. There's over 500 kids that participate in that club. And so I think I put a calculation in there that, that first year it would be about $26 a player that the rate would go up. And then if we do a discount on that, then the second year it would be an additional 50. So like $76 per player, to make up the difference for those fees. So, I did put the 9605P in there. I don't know that we need to necessarily spend a lot of time going through that. That's in your board packet. You can see the red line there. I just have it in case you have any questions on that. Additionally, in your packet, I put some rates that we have spent a little bit of time looking at what it costs for our outdoor fields in terms of fertilizing, irrigation, aerating, mowing, weed control, et cetera, that we do to maintain our fields. Certainly we use some of that, but the middle schools, for example, 90% of that are rental users that do that. So there's a couple other procedures that are included in your packet. Most of those changes are fairly minor, just kind of a few things to clarify and align, basically saying like, renters responsible for damage. There's also a couple policies, and those policies, we will have to follow the guidelines for policies. So we'll bring those back to the board in June, and then again in July for final approval, so that they can go out for public comment. But administratively, we don't feel like any of those policy changes impact the approval of fees today, because they're fairly minor in just terms of clarifying, a few little details as we were going through the process of this rental guide and the rental process. So the policy as they're written today are fine. I think they're just a few more clarifying points as we move forward on this. So the recommendation that's being brought to you, basically, as you can see, it's a package. Ultimately, you'll be approving the fee schedule that's defined on 9605 E1 and E2. Again, the procedures don't have to be approved by the board, but we wanted you to be aware of those and see the changes and the updates we've made to the rental facility guide, and then the revisions will come back to the board. I know there's been some discussion based on some emails that the board has received about, whether or not we should offer a discount. Administratively, we feel that it's probably the right thing to do because you've got some users that are going from paying us $700 to maybe $6,000 in an increase. That's a fairly hard increase without a little bit of time to adjust your fees. I can tell you the 2 soccer programs I know are going into their tryouts next week, so their fees are set for right now. That is ultimately why we made a recommendation to have a roll-in to phase this in, because we don't want to make it so hard on the youth sports programs, but at the same time we know we need to align. And so I think giving a runway is probably the right thing to do. That's why it was the recommendation, or at least that's the way that we feel. Certainly it's the purview of the board to say, no, we like these rates, we want to set them, we want to implement them, as of July 1, and we'll roll with it, and see how that goes. I think another thing we could throw out there too is we could do a 6-month runway. I was thinking about this a little bit over the weekend as well, that, we don't book out more than 6 months in advance. So basically right now we told all the users, you're welcome to book, for the next 6 months going in through, July, basically through the first of the year. But we will be looking at new rates, and you'll be responsible for those new rates should the board approve them. And so, pending this hearing today, we'll send a letter out and say, all right, here are the new rates. Here's what it's going to be for you. Do you want to adjust any of your usage time? So there'll be a little bit of juggling, I'm sure, based on new rates as we move forward. So we could do a 6-month roll-in. I think some of those softball programs probably wouldn't be booking fields until next spring. That's about, they're wrapping up their seasons right now, so there's not a ton of softball, baseball, a little bit that goes on over the summer, but not a ton. And so looking ahead, it's mainly some of those programs that are going into their seasons right now and having some of their tryouts coming into the summer and the fall that, we feel like it's probably good to give a little bit of a runway to. So that's a lot of information. I know there's a lot in your packet. Questions?
This isn't a question, but thank you for all of that information.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, that concludes then. Do you have additional questions?
I was just going to say thank you to Jeff, and thanks for addressing the staged increase as well of the discount.
Yeah, it's, you put a lot of time and effort into this. It's just a comment. There's just some folks that are, 500, 2,000% increases on here.
Yep.
That's tough to swallow, because I can tell you they don't have $6,000 in their bank accounts. I'm assuming that all of these are C's and D's.
Yes.
Much on the spreadsheet.
Yes.
So, the only concern that I have is that it will, there's going to be a kid out there somewhere that won't be able to afford the raise and the dues. And it's offset by a whole lot, but it's a lot of dough. I'm not saying that we aren't getting up to market rates. It's just a lot to catch it up with so fast. So, but thank you for putting it together. I like the thoughtfulness and, segueing them in, transitioning them in at 50%. So that's my comment there.
Thanks, Jeff. Really. This concludes then the increase presentation part. We will now move into the public comment part of the facility rental fee increase hearing. And so we will again welcome public comment. And Mr. McCollum, if you would like to give public comment.
Again, I know there's a lot going into all this. I want to thank Jeff and everybody for all the work they're doing and trying to come to grips with all the excess costs that are being piled on to everybody in every way. First thing I got to say is don't be afraid to be aggressive. I like the idea of the 6-month chunk to start out with the rollout to kind of feel out your responses. I think that's a good idea. But again, don't be afraid to be aggressive with the costs. I wasn't quite clear on the 50% rate cut. Was that 50% in a cut of what was going to be added? Just want to make sure about that. Yeah, because that's a tough one. But again, at the end of the 6 month, at the end of the year, it's always easier to go to especially your bigger clients, as it were, and be generous on the back end and say, hey, thanks for all the use, thanks for all the money. We're going to give you a break one way or the other, however you want to work that out. But it's almost impossible to, at the end of the contract, come back and say, oops, we need more money. Nobody wants to do that. But again, thank you all for all the hard work, because I know this is a tough one. All the budgetary items coming up are going to be tough. And as long as, just fall down, I think everybody's going to be behind you as far as that goes. That's about all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks. Let me just close that piece, and then how about when we come back to making action? Okay, so this concludes the facility rental fee increase hearing. Thanks to everyone who participated. We'll now move on to potential action then. So the first thing for action then would be to come back to the meal price increase. And so, trustees, is there more discussion on the meal price increase?
I move to approve the meal prices as presented in the board memo.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, so meal price increases then will be adjusted. Let's go into then the facility rental fee increases there. Trustee McAndrew, you had an additional
Yeah, I
question or comment?
just wanted to confirm. So, Jeff, looking at the contract income that we have, that 91,922. I guess at the end of this, I'm looking at projected profit of 165 grand. Do I have that wrong? I got the contract of 92,000 plus the potential, and this is with the 50%. That's 205,000. So roughly 297 grand minus 131,763 for maintenance.
Let's see. So you are looking at on the grand total on the bottom of that spreadsheet that you're looking at, $91,000. That's the total income between contracts, indoor and outdoor rentals.
Right.
And then 205 could be the projected revenue based off of new rates.
Okay. So that's my question. Is that
Yeah.
205,080 down the road plus 53? You're looking at 258 grand, right?
So out of that 200, the credit of 53 would be the 50% discount for those 8 users should
Right.
we decide to offer that
So
for
in,
1 year.
in 2 years from now, though, that forecast is 258 grand.
No, it'd be 200. You'd subtract the 50 out of
Okay,
that 200.
so that is coming out of there.
Yes.
Okay, so going forward, 205 plus the 91 from the contracts.
No,
That's
the
in
con,
there?
the contracts are
Then I'm good.
44,000.
Okay.
Jeff, just real quick for clarification, the 8 people that were offering the kind of step discount into the new pricing, is that for 6 months? Is that for a year? What is the
Well, I think that's part of the conversation, and so that's what I was saying. I think there's maybe 2 options for that
Oh,
that
so
the
we have
board
options.
could contemplate. It would be 1 year was the recommendation that was written into the board packet.
Right.
But based on reflection after some of those emails and the questions that some trustees were individually asking over the weekend, we do book out 6 months in advance, right? So basically, we have things booked now for the next 6 months. And then we don't have anything booked after that. And so, we could certainly consider a 6-month runway as well.
I'm in favor of that. I mean, I hate to raise prices on anyone, but that's where we are. I mean, we're getting slammed every which way, it seems like, and everything is increasing. So we have to keep up so that, fall further behind. So.
Can I ask, so the soccer clubs, for instance, have their tryouts next week, so they've set their fees already. Are there other users that would have been in that situation? Like,
Junior tackle season they do some summer training, and then I think they start towards the end of summer and fall. Baseball, softball are wrapping up. Tennis is just kind of an ongoing group that comes in over the summer.
okay. So 6 months would catch those groups.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I'm a lot more comfortable with the 6 months over the year, for sure.
Yeah, it gives them plenty of time to make the adjustments. They're setting rates at this point for spring sports or whatever, so.
So we got 73,000 in profit. I don't know about you guys, it almost does feel like, it's just one of those things that I would prefer that we were breaking even on, to be honest with you, just because it does so much for the community. I think I might be alone in that regard, but that's okay.
Well, I guess, looking at your comparison chart, if they don't rent from us, they're going to rent from someplace else. And it did
Right.
seem like you were raising us to be very competitive and comparable. It's not like we're gouging people and being the most expensive. So,
Yeah. No,
so with that in mind,
Well, you're pulling from that 130 to maintain the outdoor stuff, but that whole 205 is not from outdoor.
no, right.
So I don't know that we're actually making more on outdoor rentals than we're
That's
paid.
what my first question was, is that we've got 205 and we've got 131 for,
Right, but that 205 includes indoor use as well?
right, so where am I off then? So where are we breaking even then?
no.
Okay.
I think not.
I think
not quite.
And Trustee McAndrew, remember in that, overall cost of $130,000 that it takes to maintain our fields, some of those are our high school fields that we pretty much solely use. Some of those are, like, for example, I'm just looking at the Dalton playground, right? The Dalton field, it's rented, but it's also the playground field. And so, while we irrigate it and we fertilize it, we would do that for our use. And so, it's a little bit hard to extrapolate how much is our use versus what is rental use for that, of our facilities. But I do know in the middle schools, for example, we don't use that much at all. Occasionally a high school, maybe a JV team will come in and practice on the middle school field and book a little bit of time there, but it's not a lot. Most of like the middle schools, all of the, softball, baseball, soccer fields are junior tackle and soccer and lacrosse that use those almost exclusively.
All right. Trustee McAndrew, any additional? No. Okay.
How are we going to work as the change it to 6 months?
Gosh.
Do we have to print it separate?
50%
6 months after that. I guess even after FY20.
Well, I move to approve the facility rental fee increases as presented and grant a 6-month 50% discount on facility rental fees in fiscal year 25 to current user groups that have rented 400 or more hours per year during the last 2 years.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? All right. We'll adjust those. Again, Jeff, thanks to you and your team. So many details, so that's a, yeah.
Thank you. It's been a lot of work, but I appreciate that. Almost. I got one more presentation I got to do for you.
Okay. Well, take a break for a second.
Jeff Knight. All right, there's a consent agenda then here regarding cybersecurity, backup services, and so all sorts of tech stuff. Is there a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, consent agenda is passed. We have additional information there. Congratulations to Winton, just on their new playground purchase. It's a big deal, and exciting for them. There's some guidelines as well in there and some safety busing committee report as well. And so, any questions on any of those? Oh, okay. So Jeff, you will go ahead and present on the safety busing committee report then?
Like I said, one more presentation to do.
Go.
You get a heavy dose of me today, and this is a big day because this is the culmination of a lot of work over the last 6 months that my teams have been putting in. So thanks for bearing with us. So if you recall, at the beginning of the school year, we created a little bit of a mess with our busing system, and we did a board workshop after that kind of talked that through a little bit. And, we definitely reeled some of that back and basically reinstated the routes. And part of that conflict was there's a safety busing score that is put out on a worksheet by the state. And historically, we've kind of used 70 as that score, but that had never been defined in board policy. And then in the audit, and so when Donda was rerouting things, she realized there were a lot of inconsistencies going on with that. And so in looking at that score of 70, there were a lot of areas that didn't qualify for safety busing, that we just had been automatically doing safety busing over the years. And so when we pulled that back, there were quite a few students that lost transportation, and we acknowledged that. And so then when we had the state audit, the state said, in your board policy, you have never defined what that safety busing score is. And so you need to define that. And they also recommend putting together a safety busing committee. And so we put together a committee and we started meeting over the last several months. And the committee members are listed in your board packet, but we had a wide range of representation from like our safety and security coordinator, a representative from the city of Coeur d'Alene. He was the streets engineer. We had a vice principal. We had 2 bus drivers that both have kids in the district. I did have a parent that was going to be on the committee, but she never showed up to any of the meetings despite my attempts to corral her in. But so despite her commitment, did not show up. But they spent a lot of time and a lot of thoughtful process in looking through this. And so there's a lot of detail in an executive summary that I put into your packet. I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through that other than to highlight that, like in board policy, ultimately what we need to do is in policy 8110 is we need to add that paragraph that is in red that basically says the Board of Trustees adopts the State Department's education measuring instrument for walking students. So it's basically saying we're using that metrics that the state provides, and I'll show you that here in just a second so you understand what that means. And then it says and assuming you accept the breakoff point that we're going to recommend, that the committee represents an established score of 50. And so I will get into that so you understand what that score means, but that's ultimately where we're going with this, is that we will be approving that policy. And again, that policy will come back in June, go through the regular policy procedure. But so since this is a workshop, it is our opportunity to present the work that the Safety Busing Committee has done. So this is the measuring instrument for walking students. This is put out by the Idaho State Department of Education and Transportation. And it's a complicated matrix. I'm not going to spend a ton of time really explaining it. Dawn is the expert that goes through this, but you basically have to count cars. You look at all kinds of different, what's the posted speed limits. Like we literally have sat out on street corners counting cars with a clicker, just counting vehicles at a certain time to verify how many vehicles go in so that we can create a rating for this. It's weighted differently for elementary, middle, high school. So you can see there's automatically a score of 10 factored in for elementary, 2 for junior high, and 0 for high school. Just kind of acknowledging the different cognitive abilities and maturity of students as they grow through the years with us. And so we look at crossings, length of roads, are there sidewalks, are there safe walking paths, et cetera. And so this is the scoring tool that is used. And so Donda and her team spent a lot of time working through this and going through the safety busing zones. And so this is ultimately is the metric that we will be, the board is recognizing that we are using as the tool to define our safety busing. And then you end up with a cumulative score down here. The overall rating it could be up to 140. And quite a few school districts just go half and say, 70 would be their cutoff score. When we looked at that, there's a lot of students that are impacted by that. And so I'm going to spend a few minutes going through some of those maps that Dawn and her team put together. And this is what the Safety Busing Committee spent a good bit of time discussing where we would want to land on this. So I'm going to go through a map for every school here. And so what you're looking at on this map is you can see the school right in the middle of the map. Let me get that cursor here. So the school is right here. This is Atlas Elementary, right? So you can see the little school flagged on the map. And then the bold is the zone of the school. The blue circle is a 1.5 mile radius. So in your board packet, it talks a lot about the different, 1.5 miles we know is the radius that the state says we do not provide busing unless it's safety busing within 1.5 mile radius of the school. You can see in Atlas, there's very few of that zone that is actually outside of that radius, right? And so, in theory, we wouldn't provide any busing to Atlas at all. But we know there's some areas that aren't safe to travel. And so, that's where Donda took that scoring sheet, sat out with her team, and they started doing the counts. And so the yellow box is the score so here in this area that you see shaded in this kind of purplish, that was an area that we defined as safety busing. This area down in here, so all these students are walkers, and but we looked at some of those outskirt peripheral areas and said, okay, we know there's maybe some not safe areas in there. Let's look at that. So this top area up in here came up with a score of 77, and you can see there are 8 out of 19 potential riders. So 8 registered riders out of 19 potential riders in that area. So that's how you're reading this little box right here when you look at these. And so, you've got this area scored 77, this area scored 50, this area scored 55, 67 for this little area down in here. This area on the right, there's some new sidewalks on Prairie, and so that doesn't have a score. And then 68 on this lower area down in here. So you can see if we would have gone with a score of 70, this area would have lost their busing, this area would have lost their busing, this area would have lost their busing, this area would have lost their busing. The only area that would maintain busing is right here. Okay. And so, so Donna was going through and factoring that, and we spent a lot of time discussing this as a committee, and looking at just, the region of, this is Atlas Avenue right here, and so there's, barely at a 50 right there, but we feel like those students should have safety busing provided for them, 55 over in here. And so that's when we say the score of 50. And so when you look at Atlas, there's no impact with a score of 50. So all of those riders maintain their safety busing status of the current routes. So
Jeff,
yes,
just because I live in that area, I seeing a 67 and a 68 and knowing what those walks would be like, I just want to say generally I think I'm supportive of lower than 70. Just because those would not be walks I'd want to send my elementary kid on. For sure.
And we really spent a lot of time thinking about that, as especially of the difference of an elementary as opposed to maybe even a middle school and a high school kid too. I think there's definitely a difference in there, and you see that weighted into the calculation, and you will start to see a little bit more impact as we go through this with those middle and high schools. There's a few more areas that wouldn't qualify, but again, so. Atlas, there would be no impact if we go with a score of 50. So there would be if we went with a score of 70, as you can see there. So there'd be considerable impact. I think so. Yeah. Okay, so then we go to, so this is Brian. Bryan was a last minute change, obviously, because of some of the changes that we made with the repurposing of Bora. And so, we took a long look at this. So, this region of Bryan up in here are the former Bora students, many of the former Bora students. This area over in here is, what we call that Bryan Island. And so actually even the former Bryan Island, this little area in here was picked up in this 1.5 mile radius, but it still scores a 59. And so, again, at 70, those kids would be walkers. And so, this region up in here, so Bora sits somewhere right where I think around that 51 is. And so, we would collect those kids, those 4 Bora kids, and take them down to Bryan. This is one area that would remain a walk zone. So these were former Bora students that would go down to Bryan right here. That's about a 3/4 to a mile distance up in there. And then you see 69 over here. So with the existing Bryan zone, there's no impact at all. With the addition of the Bora students, not a lot of impact other than, these students would be walkers in here. There's 12 potential students in this square right in here. We don't know because we don't have the data of whether they would be walkers or riders going to Bryan. So that's why there's a question mark on the left-hand side right here. And what's that? Do you say in between? In between the Bryan zone and but when you look at the 1.5 mile radius, you're 3/4 of a mile for these couple students down in here, up into around 0.8-ish miles up in there for those students. And there's this is the freeway going across right in here, but there's walking bridges going across the freeway. So there's very safe travel routes to go down across to get into that Bryan area. Okay, so that's Bryan. Dalton does have one area of change. You can see it scored 77, 66. This area down in here scored a 45. The reason that one scored lower now this year is right in here, there's a crossing beacon that was put in on Dalton Avenue. So there's a very safe crossing that comes out of this neighborhood to go across Dalton Avenue, where you can push the flashing beacon, cross the road, and then continue your walk up to Dalton. And I think it's only a half mile is even the walk. Does that seem right, Donda? Yeah, I think you were looking at that. So that one area is 25 registered riders out of 58 potential in there. And I think that neighborhood knows that's coming. We've heard some comments from some of those current riders that they're like, yeah, we're pretty sure we're losing our busing next year. So, next steps from this is we will send out messaging to say, all right, we're making some changes. We took a long look at the safety busing, and here are the areas that do have impact. So there's Dalton. Hayden Meadows, Fernan is next. So Fernan, really no changes to Fernan. Most of those areas are up in the hills along Fernan and French Gulch and those areas, so no change there. One thing to note in here, this is a subdivision that has infrastructure being put in, but there's no homes in there yet, but that would actually be in a walk zone. So if any kids come out of that development, they would be in a walk zone there. Yes, it is. Yep. And then Hayden Meadows, again, no impact to Hayden Meadows. Nexa, no impact to Nexa. However, I would note that this box that you see in here is the old Hayden Meadows zone. And for some of you that are new board members, those students were grandfathered in basically, so the incoming kindergartners that were going to Nexa when it opened would be provided busing through their years before they finished at Nexa. And so this route is going away after this year. And so these students that are in here that go to Nexa will lose their busing, and probably many of those will be fifth graders that'll be moving into middle school. But we've let the younger kids ride that, a sibling of a third or a fourth grader or somebody that lives in that zone that goes to Nexa. does ride, but that bus will be going away this year as part of that grandfathering that expires. And so, and that was very clearly stated and noted in the board decisions of a few years ago. Ramsey. So Ramsey's a bit of an interesting one, right? Because Ramsey has overlays. And so with some of those overlays, we have been providing busing to Ramsey. We do have the Bora students that we would be bringing in and busing over. So again, that factors those students. There's 109 of the students that are going to Ramsey, and we don't know, again, how many riders. So 1, maybe 2 buses will be necessary to handle that load, but once we know what the registrations are. So there's a little bit of an unknown with that one. But basically, all of those areas will qualify for safety busing at a score of 50. Skyway. Skyway, no change again. Everybody that has safety busing would stay at that. Sorensen is a unique one. We have this one area down here in the Fort Grounds that has a high score of 81. There's 4 potential kids that go to Sorensen, 2 are riders. So we run 1 bus for 4 students, for 2 students. That's a little bit of a hard one. And I was talking with Donda about that today, actually, and she's going to look to see if we can't reroute another bus that might pick up those students, do a quick stop at Sorensen, and then route on to another school. So we might have to get a little bit creative with that, but that's a big resource for not a lot of potential. So, but those students do qualify for safety busing, so we need to factor that in. Let's see, Winton. Winton has a lot of busy streets around it with, Highway 95, Government Way, the freeway, and Northwest Boulevard. So Winton is kind of a unique spot that doesn't have a lot of walking riders, a few that come out of these apartments that are around Winton, but for the most part, most students are bused to Winton. And there would be no change in impact to Winton. Okay, Coeur d'Alene High School. So now you start to see, like, we've lost that factor of 10 score automatically. And so you start to see some of these scores drop where you've got 42, 42, 47, 48. This one's 50 and 50. So we're kind of right on the margin with these. And so you would see these would be recommended to go into walk zones. And but I think the thing to consider with that is there's 10 current riders out of 57 total eligible riders in those zones that are impacted. So currently not a lot of riders despite the population in those areas. Canfield Middle School, similar. This would now be a walk zone, and this area down in here would be a walk zone. You have 16 out of 35 potential riders impacted by that one. Lake City High School, you've got one little zone down here that doesn't qualify for 1 student. A zone up here, 4 students. So there's 2 areas, 5 out of 16 riders are impacted at Lake City High School. Lakes Middle School, similar story. You've got, this one actually says 42 and 48 because we were looking at 2 different walking paths for those students coming down to get to Lakes, and neither of them would qualify. And you've got, 45, 43. Lakes was 33 out of 106 riders that would be impacted by this. This is Venture Academy. Again, you've got, 42s, 42 down in here, 46 and 42. But you have 7 riders impacted by those changes there at Venture. Woodland Middle School, you've got the one area impacted up in here at a score of 46, 22 out of 69 riders. So that's kind of the bulk of the work. And like I said, the committee spent a lot of time working through this, looking at different potentials. You can see that I think with this work, while yes, there is some impact to some families and some riders, we've really minimized that impact. I think, when they did, the state called out in the audit, they said, you potentially have 700 riders that could be impacted by this, right? We've limited it down to just over 100 riders that are impacted by this, and most of them at the secondary level now. I think the only elementary that had the major impact was that one community from Dalton that now has a safe crossing beacon. And so I think, I'm going back to my notes here, but I believe it was 116 total students impacted of current riders with these changes. So that's the work of the safety busing committee. There's a few more details in that executive summary that we put in there. Maybe I'll pause for questions now and see what questions you have.
Have you already let parents know about these changes?
We have not. So we wanted the board to see them, and then we will start once, we really need the board to approve the policies on this, and then we can start putting out the messaging
Well,
on
thanks
it.
for all your hard work, all of you. This looks like crazy, like a million-piece puzzle to put together. So,
Yes.
Thank you.
You can see the complexity of it, right?
Yes.
I mean, these pieces that we brought with several of these presentations tonight are very complex, very detailed, very, and we realize they impact people. And so we want to try to do the best we can, but we do realize there is some potential impact.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jeff, we heard a lot at the beginning of the school year about those that live, south of Micah Grange and stuff. Did we just kind of?
So that's a different story because those are in lieu, right? And so those are people that we don't have the resources to go out, or it's almost a little bit like the Sorensen story where, but we know that's close in town. But, when we are going out to pick up a handful of kids, but we're driving way, way out, we will go to a certain collection point and then pay people mileage to come into that spot. So that's not factored into safety busing at all. That hasn't been discussed in any of this.
I just always think like if we can fix the Sorensen bus per se, does that
Potentially, right?
shift,
But
I
what we
just
need to
always
do
think
is,
about those
that
parents
will
that are
probably route
driving
into
the-
one of the buses going to Ramsey or Bryan with the changes of, so we're still looking at those to see if there's things that we could do to help those situations. And actually the one area that we used as a turnaround out in Rockford Bay, they're taking away, right? So we can't even turn a bus around in there anymore. So.
Thanks. Donda, thank you. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of details. It's a lot of getting kids to school. So it's important work.
I had a question about, did you say you were not going to tell parents until we approve the policy? Because that won't be till July, right?
Right. And that's the rub of timing of having to do
Pretty
a policy
late.
change. And so,
Yeah, can we give some sort of notice?
I think we could.
That would be
Yeah. I think it would be
really
good
good.
Yeah.
to do much sooner, much closer to now.
Yeah.
than
Dr. Archer, do you have a
July.
comment on that? Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, I think we can. This is the whole getting the cart first
Yeah.
scenario. We plan to present this to you for formal adoption at your June board meeting, and then you're right. If we wait for public input and then we tell the public, okay, the board has approved this at July and this is how it's going to be, it's a much tighter window. We can certainly do everything to try to let everybody be aware that this is a conversation. But yeah, the timing is tight, and there's just been so much going on. We were not able to get it out any sooner. The committee has spent an exorbitant amount of time to get us to this point. The good news is it's still doable. As long as we can get the word out in July and August, school doesn't start till September. I think that the runway is still adequate. But yeah, we'll definitely start pushing this out as early as we can to let everybody know that this is likely coming, pending the board's approval of the policy.
Great.
Yeah. So this one's for information, and then it'll come back for formal action with the policy revision, and that's really ultimately formally what the board needs to approve is that policy 8110.
Terrific. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thanks, Donna. Terrific. We'll move into then our budget update. Shannon.
Alrighty, good evening. Now this is just going to be a very quick update. We'll have, our formal budget hearing after we finished finalizing expenditures and everything, but we just wanted to give you an update of where we're at on budget development. Where we're at right now is we are finalizing personnel budgets literally today and tomorrow. Over the weekend, reviewed 15,000 different data items to update amounts and looked at every single assignment that we currently have in movement. So that is finalized. Now we can do the fun work of rerunning those calculations, applying benefits to all those updates, and then importing them into the budget to get our final big picture look. All our non-personnel budgets have pretty much finalized. So home stretch. We met with the budget subcommittee last week to go over revenues. So our revenue situation going into when we first did kind of our budget projection look in January, we were projecting a $4.2 million reduction in revenue, mainly on the state side because of our declining enrollment in ADA. Now where we're at with all the legislative updates, we are looking at just a loss of $2.5 million. So better than expected and what we've been presenting along with you. With that, there's another side, revenues one side, expenditures are the other side. We've been projecting increases, of course, with medical, also inflationary increases across the board. Trustee Bjerke was at the budget subcommittee, and we're just seeing, crazy rises with utilities, transportation, both the parts and services, operations, custodial supplies across the board. So that will have to be applied. There were many years where budgets were held flat at the operational level. Pretty much you have your budget, you roll it over, you live within that budget. No really increase for CPI, Consumer Price Index, or anything. At this point, we cannot maintain flat budgets anymore. They've already reduced so much of the services that they can provide. So that is really kind of, we need to make sure that's part of our budget philosophy, is including some CPI and always adjusting for inflation. We can't really maintain status quo anymore. So as far as the revenue situation goes, really there was some great investment in facilities with facilities modernization funding. That's going to be House Bill 521. There was a little catch with that. They're taking away our lottery funding. That's about $1 million that we use each year. It's in the general fund, and that we use that for routine maintenance, including maintenance salaries. In the law, it's code 33917-1A. It clearly states that it can be used for regular and routine maintenance, including preventative maintenance, building repairs, building security. We thought, okay, we're good. We're going to get this big one-time chunk of money, $36 million. That's for the course of 10 years. We'll carve out lottery from that, what we are losing. So that's about $10 million over the course of 10 years, $1 million each year. And we'll be able to help cover the loss of that $1 million in our general fund for maintenance salaries. On Friday, the State Department of Education CFO sent out some guidance from the State Building Authority saying that House Bill 521, with the routine maintenance allowable expenditures, is in direct conflict with bonding law. And that funding can only be used for capital expenditures and not your routine maintenance. Their lawyers are working on it. So HB 521, with its law, it's written in routine maintenance, direct conflict with bonding law. We won't know any more until June 5th. So we do have a 2-year resolution and a recommendation. When we were projecting a slight deficit for this year, no longer a deficit with some great gains in interest revenue and some helpful increases to our salary-based apportionment, we are going to carve off $1 million from our last of our ESSER funding that was tied to facility projects to help offset that deficit. Well, we can still use that. And also in addition, so we kind of have presented along its ESSER 3/Fund 430, our capital projects budget. There is about $800,000 of unstarted projects in that fund, along with 400,000 of savings from projects that came under. So that's another 1.22 million. So overall, and in the ESSER/Fund 430 capital projects budget, there's 2.22 million of unstarted projects, savings from completed projects, and that $1 million, let's hold on to it and see how this year ends. That's a 2-year fix for the lottery. It's just gonna delay, and we're gonna have to find a solution. Hopefully, within that time frame, we'll hear from the state and the building authority and the lawyers at the state level that hopefully they can figure something out. I do know bonding law is very complex, and it's been in statute for a long time, so I don't know if a new bill can override that stuff, but I'm sure they'll be working hard on that. Dr. Hawker has spoken to Superintendent Critchfield about this. I think it's getting a lot of attention, especially after that Friday email to superintendents and business managers. So a lot of unknowns around that. We do have a fix, and I'll be presenting that fix in the budget as a one-time fix for you to approve. We will have to uncommit those Fund 430 funds with a resolution.
Is the question, so does that mean maybe for Jeff, does that mean the projects we were going to do this summer with that money would not take place? Or have we already signed contracts and stuff?
I too just found out about it today. So,
So you don't
I
know.
believe, and Shannon, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we can reallocate the funds for those projects from this House Bill 521 money and not the ESSER. Well, most of it's actually already committed through the ESSER. Many of that, let me reframe that. Much of it is already committed through ESSER dollars that were not factored in the balance that she just said of the $1 million. So most of those should still be able to go this summer, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so all of these balances are from projects that we don't even have bids for them. They haven't been started. And there's a nice summary in your monthly financials from this last week that shows our capital facilities fund, and then it shows what projects have been completed, the remaining balance, what projects are in progress with remaining balances, and which ones have not been started with remaining balances for that. So
Okay,
You
so
can
the
get an
things
idea
that
of
are
all the
already in
pieces.
motion
they're all
will
covered.
continue,
They're good.
but
Yeah.
we'll hold off.
Hold off on things that haven't been started and savings from identified projects.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so next steps.
I just want to
Yeah.
add real quick, just for a point of clarification. When I called Superintendent Critchfield Friday morning, I left her a good detailed voice message. I've not talked to her personally. She called me back Friday afternoon, and I was not available to take the call, and so we're still playing phone tag. But she's aware of what I left on the message in regards to this concern. I just wanted to make sure if somebody's out there watching like her, she's like, wait, I haven't formally talked to Sean. It was a voice message. We're just trying to make sure the state is very well aware of this. My hunch is I already knew that if everything was smooth, we knew that they wouldn't be able to release these bond funds until sometime later this fall. Now that this isn't so smooth, it makes me extra nervous, wondering when or if they'll release any funds possibly this whole year. They may have to reconvene legislation next year to try to create a fix. So it's great that we have a fallback, and we have a 2-year window to take care of the lottery dollars that will likely stop flowing to us while this is all trying to be figured out.
I apologize, Sean. Sorry, I got ahead of the
no
horse. All right, so next steps, we are literally finalizing expenditures, and we'll have that ready on Wednesday. The budget subcommittee meets again on Thursday. Thank you, Trustee Bierke. Our budget subcommittee is wonderful. They do dedicate a lot of time, and it's very technical, so they sit there for an hour and a half and go through all of it with me. And then once that's ready, we'll have to the press a budget summary drafted, and it has to be published 2 weeks before the hearing. Now it's just a summary, and it's a draft. It's nothing final. The budget hearing is just a draft and nothing final. We'll do about an hour, hopefully not an hour and 30 minutes of a budget hearing presentation where I walk you through all the changes that have occurred, all our funds, and then there will be 2 weeks in between that period. And then after that, there will be the adoption for that. So that is where we're at with the budget. It is important to note that anything that's decided in negotiations will not be reflected in this budget just because of the timeline. And at that point, we adopt, and then we do a budget amendment in July to reflect all those updates. So that's kind of how it works. All right, thanks.
Terrific. Any additional questions? Thank you, Shannon. Thanks. All right. Next up, Stephanie. And I believe we have some papers in our folders as well, trustees. And welcome, Stephanie, to walk us through the structure of the DO in our schools and just so we can have a greater understanding of how this all works.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you. Is this on? It is on. I'm going to go through this really quickly to honor your time. And you do have it. You have copies of the slide deck and you have copies of the org chart. We thought we would do this, have this really brief conversation. Like so many of these conversations, it's sort of chapter one of an ongoing discussion that we'll have. But we know that, you know, our community has questions about the district office and who works there and what do the people who work there do all day. So it's a good question, and it's one that we're happy to answer, and we're happy to answer it. I'm just pulling our communication goal back up here. It's so important for us to be transparent with our community when they have questions. So that's what we're doing. And if you have questions as we go through, don't hesitate to stop. So we understand this. Trustee McAndrew addressed this at the outdoor meeting we had with Trustee Anderton too. People are suspicious of things they don't understand. We all are. Things that aren't familiar and that we don't understand, we are going to ask questions about those things. And that's just fine. Our job as part of the folks that make up the DO is to try to help people understand the way we see things and how the district office is structured. But we're going to have to answer this question multiple times because we have our current staff, our current parents, board members, members of the community that are asking questions about this. But every year we have new people that move to the community. We have new parents that join the district. We have new staff that join the district. So we're going to have to answer this question regularly, and that's okay. These are some of the questions that we got, and I know you all got these too. While we were moving through our budget conversation, people were asking these very questions about who's in the district office and what are you doing and is the district top heavy? Somebody please explain it. So that's kind of what we're going to do here. I thought, you know, one way to help maybe reframe the conversation a little bit is to talk about who the district is. People don't think about school districts necessarily as businesses, large organizations that require a lot of people to run, but they do. So the district office, our school district, has 1,500 employees. We're the second largest employer, right behind Kootenai Health, in this county of almost, you know, getting upwards of 200,000 people, which is crazy to think about. $100 million budget, seventh largest district in the state. We have 9,600 students, 17 schools, and 24 facility buildings. And it takes people to run those. And we got to see from our awesome colleague and friend, Jeff Voller, today, wearing 3 different hats as he manages transportation and nutrition and what was the other one? Facilities. So he's doing those 3 things extraordinarily well. And so you got a glimpse of what that looks like. I know you know what that looks like, but it's complicated. So the way I think about this organization is it's large and complex and decentralized. And it has two parts, has the instruction part and the business operations part. And those are the people who are managing those areas are the people who live in the district office. I call it the engine just because that makes sense to me. The people in the district office are making sure the engine of the district continues to run smoothly, that all of the busing and transportation issues are handled, that finance is handled, that people get paid, that HR is managing all of our employees and taking care of their needs. That stuff's going on while our teachers and the folks that are supporting our students are in the schools taking care of those kids, which is what we need them to do. So our district office has 13 departments, and it looks kind of like this. On the instruction side, you'll see these reflected in the org chart on the left side. And on the right side are the operations departments. So this org chart, and you have a copy of it so you can see it better. This is the instruction side. So you'll see at the top there, the superintendent and the deputy superintendent, and then the folks that are in these top boxes. Those are Dr. Nelson's direct reports. So he is responsible for everything that those folks are doing, ultimately. And he reports up to the superintendent. So I've color-coded this so you can see what, kind of what those mean. Some folks that are in the office, that are assigned to the office don't come to the office every day, they're in the schools. Some people are either assigned to the office or not assigned to the office based on what they do and how the state codes them. I think that's weedy. I think we're getting in the weeds there. I think what's important here is to see how it's structured. And I've talked to a few of you about, who does what. You can see how these positions are organized. This second slide here is the operations side of the house. So these folks, the superintendent is at the top here. Those salmon-colored boxes at the top are the directors of each area of functionality on the operations side. Those are all Dr. Hawker's direct reports. And then there's some others that aren't on this sheet. And then we are all responsible for the folks that fall below us and the work product of all of those people. Again, the ones that are color-coded that aren't in the buildings, they're not in the district office. They're in school buildings doing their thing. So I think the total there is, if I'm doing my math right, Eric, it's 23 plus 28, 53 people in the building. Is that right? 23 plus what? 51. Thank goodness. I'm a word person, not a number person. So yeah, that's the number of people that are in the district office. And a lot of them you'll see there's administrative assistants, there's our amazing clerk of the board. I mean, people that are supporting those of us that are managing and doing at the same time. And you can see from Jeff's example, and Shannon's always, and everybody's, they're doers and they're managers. So they're doing the work, they're running the programming, and they're managing their people. And for those of you that are in, larger organizations, this should look pretty familiar to you as far as what it takes to run an organization. Any questions about that? Either one of those? And yeah.
We know that we've got about
That's correct.
really quick.
Yes. Eric saying yes.
I'm sorry. The question was, those 16 positions that we know that we have, do those sunset or That, as far as the grants
They're
and everything?
grant funded.
Or do we renew for those and have a history of doing that? I think
It's mostly, yeah, it's
Federal, I'm sorry.
like federal funding,
Yeah.
which is a grant that you do have to qualify for.
Yeah.
That's in general. We have some 21st century grant that's got to be renewed every 4 or 5 years, and 5 years to keep that funding. So there are some of those, and then of course the federal programs are based on
Right.
us qualifying and
But none of the stuff like ESSER that goes away and then never comes
Correct.
back and like that. So that's important for folks to know that 30% of that, that building or the folks that are there, almost 30% are funded elsewhere. I mean, we all pay for it, but their levy dollars, their property taxes, all that aren't funding it. So,
Yep. And so if you want to look, I would just call out the it's Seth's position, the Director of Technology and Safety and Security. So he's one of those people that gets to handle 2 large areas
Yeah.
as well. So Seth is managing safety and security and technology, ginormous things in and of themselves, and the staff that go along with them. And they're pretty urgent things. Technology needs to work and our buildings need to be safe. So these are, you know who these folks are. But they are, when we talk about being lean in the district office, that's kind of what we're talking about. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. Not to mention this. Well, and it's the students too, and their parents, and our community. So we know it's a lot, and it's a pleasure to do. But this was kind of a fun exercise just to put it all down on paper, so we actually know exactly. For now, some of these positions are not. They'll come off the org chart as we move through our budget reductions. But these are, the big buckets, the directors and the leadership team and the areas that they're managing are still the same.
So this org chart is from this year?
Yes.
Okay.
Hot off the press from like this morning. It's really current. But if there are things, if you have questions about it, please let us know and we'll make some adjustments. The last thing, so you've heard us talk about this curriculum audit, and I think Dr. Hawker has it with him or can make it available. It's on our website, and I can send this deck to you so you can hit the link. This is, so when people say, the district is top heavy and you have too many people in the district office, well, now you know kind of what they are. There's leaders and their support staff, and a lot of doers in that group. This is the recommendation that came out of that 2019 curriculum audit that suggested how perhaps this district ought to be organized. So, and Dr. Hawker, I'll let you speak to this since you were here. I just wanted you to look at the positions that are listed, at the top. There's a superintendent and there's an assistant superintendent or a deputy superintendent position. That's a recommendation. And then the other piece was, you guys really ought to have a director of operations because it's a separate side of the house. And we don't have that position. But the others are essentially the same. As you look at that list across the top there of those leadership positions, we primarily have those. Go ahead, Dr.
Well, just real quick, I'll just add, yes, all those areas that you see are in black. Most of those areas, that's their recommendation, and we won't have next year. We did some organization up there with Dr. Nelson's position and collapsed some positions when I first got here, trying to do my very best to align to perhaps this recommendation. So Dr. Nelson's position, which you'd see right below mine, that would remain. That's planning to be there. Though the sections that you see down below that are in the black in the left corner down there, I know it's kind of hard to read. We started that with some grant-focused title funding to to focus on our coaches, our instructional coaches. That was in direct relations to this, specific scenario. But as we are in a downward enrollment budget challenged time, those positions have also been removed. So we're back to looking at this chart pretty darn similarly. Other than Dr. Nelson's position, we would have a name that we would be able to put there. The other ones just have not been filled as well. But you can see the rest of the flow, very, very, very close to what we currently have.
So here's just a few takeaways, and I hope we can continue to talk about it. I think, for me at least, the District 271 team, whether you're in the district office or you're in a school building, we're all one team and we're dependent on each other to be successful. If the district office team is strong and talented and lean as we need to be and getting the work done, that helps all of our principals and our teachers and our kids ultimately out in our school buildings. So we think of ourselves as being integrated rather than separate from, that the DO is not somehow tangential to the rest of the organization. We view ourselves, we're a little community and a little family inside the DO, but we're very connected across the district as well. We also learned, and y'all are helping me with this, when I got here I thought, what is a building? Isn't a building a school? How come we don't call them schools? So we're learning that vocabulary matters. When we say buildings, we mean schools. So we can be clear about that. When we say building admin, I think, and I wonder what you guys think, but when we say building admin, I'm thinking people are thinking that that's the district office administration. But it's school principals. That's what that means most of the time when we talk about that. So we can be more clear about that. If we're saying admin every other sentence, people are probably going to think there's admin everywhere. And we have the number of administrators we need, but I think we can be more clear there. And then when we talk about district admin, we're talking about the administrators in the district office, but also the coordinators and the leaders that are in the building doing that work to support whoever they report to, all the way up the chain and all the way down the chain. That's kind of how that works. And we know we need skilled professionals on both sides of the house in our school buildings, doing that great work with our kids, and then in the district office to provide support for all of those folks that are doing that work on the ground. And I think that's it. So we're happy to, if you have questions about what specific people are doing, I didn't attach names, you have the positions. What do those actually do? We could probably link job descriptions to those so you could just click on it and see exactly what people are doing. And we can come back and answer specific questions that you have about what individual folks are doing.
Thanks for putting this together, Stephanie. This is the first time, I had a sense of this org chart, but it's the first time I've actually seen the org chart. So thank you for that.
Lots of help.
And I just want to say thanks to all of our staff, but including our district administration. You really do things that are pivotal to be done so that our principals can run their buildings, their school buildings.
Their schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah. Seems like 3% of the overall team, the mothership, being 3% of the whole unit seems pretty fair. I will say this was one of my favorite things that I got when I became a trustee, but it was highly confusing to me because I went through and just racking my brain. It was good to get faces and names, but at some point in time I thought maybe everybody in here is admin or building admin or not. So yeah, I just think the general public probably doesn't understand. They just know their kids at school and that's about it. So thank you for putting it all together. This is great. I'm sure I'll have more questions, want to go through it, but it's a great start for somebody like me.
Stephanie, or maybe Sean, just out of curiosity, why do we use terms like buildings and building admin instead of schools and principals and assistant principals. That's such a universally understood term. When I came here and you guys talked about that, I had no idea what you were talking about for a while. Obviously, I figured it out, but it just seems like the universal terms would just be so much easier because that's what they are. There are schools that are part of our mothership and
Yeah.
our principals and our assistant principals and our counselors and our psychs and all the stuff.
Yep.
I don't know. I don't know why we do this.
I think it may just be, we can ask Dr. Nelson. State reporting. Okay, so, yeah.
Christine?
So that's one of those areas where you translate the state reporting or, the legalese and all that necessary language into the language that our community speaks. That's our job, right? Is to speak their language, not to expect them to figure out ours. So I hope this is okay, Dr. Hucker. I mean, I think there are
really good,
things to change that we can change for sure. And so there were several of you pointed this out to me, and so I just went with it when I got here. But if people say that doesn't make sense to me, you're making me think too hard about what that is, we can change that.
Yeah, and I would just add too, this isn't language that we dreamt up. We've been carrying it along. Several folks here, especially Dr. Nelson's been around for a long time, and I'm sure this terminology was used back then. I think one great opportunity that we have is Stephanie and Seth and the team have been working very diligently on a refresh of our district webpage and just how information will flow and how it will look. We're anticipating that's going to roll out sometime this summer, I think.
So cool, you're going to love it.
It's going to be really good, and I think that is going to be a great opportunity for us to showcase some specific things like perhaps these org charts and just continue to get that information in the right place and allow us to, we can use the words that are just easier to understand and just be more focused on all of that. Everybody that knows anything with schools just knows it's alphabet soup with all kinds of acronyms. And the longer you're in them, the more guilty you are of using them because that is what you hear. But to the average person, they have no idea what most of those acronyms are. And so I think we just need to always pause and be careful that we are to Stephanie's point, we always have new staff, we always have new community members. We need to just remind ourselves of that as an ongoing basis so we can make sure everybody understands what we're trying to communicate.
Dumb it down for us.
I just think having common terms that most people understand, it's not like no one understands these words, people do, but it's just easier to say schools.
Yep.
And principals and teachers and, because that's just what most people know already. So
Yeah.
instead of having to wonder, well, what buildings are they talking about?
Right. I mean, I've heard a lot of folks, again, it's just there were positions that were rightfully added to support our schools. But when you hear, well, that position's admin, you're going, no, they're not. They work in the school that my kid's at. And so it just kind of murkied the water a little bit for a lot of folks.
Common language.
And it's like one of those, when you're afraid to ask a question because you look like the dumb kid, I think a lot of at least I kind of suffer from that. Classified, not classified. This, there's just a lot of minutia.
But that stuff helps. You guys are all elected officials. You represent people in your communities that do have those questions. So don't hesitate to bring them. If there's things we're saying, things we're doing that don't make sense, we need to know that so we can change it so it's more effective. That's the goal, is to help people understand what we're doing.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks so much. Thanks for bringing this together. Seriously, thanks. All right. We've got 2 meetings coming up then. June 10th, that'll be the public budget hearing and a regular meeting as well. And then June 24th, which will be our budget adoption and Board of Trustees workshop. We are going to move into executive session. So executive session per Idaho Code 74-2061B to consider the evaluation, dismissal, or disciplining of, or to hear complaints or charges brought against a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual agent, or public school student, and 74-2061 J, to consider labor contract matters authorized under section 74-206 1A and B Idaho Code. Is
So moved, so that I don't have to repeat that.
there you go.
Second.
Roll call, Miss.
Trustee Smith?
Yes.
Trustee Bierke? Yes. Trustee Tenbrink? Yes. Trustee Anderson? Yes. Trustee McFerrin?
Yes. We'll go ahead and take a 5-minute recess and close the doors and clear the room. And we have 2 different topics tonight.